Welcome back. 20 minutes before 8 on this Friday morning. So this year marks the 25th anniversary of the South African Constitution. The Department of Justice and Constitutional Development yesterday said this gives the country an opportunity to reflect, but also for the government to heighten awareness on the rights enshrined in this document. Hailed as one of the most progressive constitutions in the world, it would be interesting to get the views of the South Africans 25 years later from the time it was signed in Sharpeville, Johannesburg, and this was all the way back in 1996. I mean, for example, how much does the society relate to Chapter 2 of the Constitution on the Bill of Rights, which is the cornerstone of South Africa's democracy, where the values of human dignity, equality and freedom are enshrined and affirmed? Let's talk about this. So, Deputy Minister at the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, John Jeffery, is with us this morning. John, it's wonderful to have you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Good morning, Leanne, and good morning to the viewers, and thanks for having me.
I know we've also got our guest, Edwin Makwati. He's a human rights lawyer and researcher at the Legal Resource Centre. I know he was just having a little bit of problems with his sound, but he was going to phone back in and he'll join our conversation, and hopefully we'll be able to chat to him as well. So, but John, let us begin this conversation. Other than the great perceptions and reviews on how progressive the South African Constitution actually is, and we hear this all the time, we really do. On paper, it looks absolutely incredible. But how educated are South Africans about the Constitution? And how does government actually ensure that it is protected and implemented?
Yeah, that's a huge question, Leanne. Look, I think let's also just state from the beginning that I think the Constitution needs to be seen in its historical context. It's an aspirational document, so it's what we're setting out to achieve. It's got to be achieved by people, whether it's public servants, whether it's elected leaders, or whether it's ordinary people of South Africa. So it involves all of us. I think there is not enough awareness. I mean, there can never, until there's 100% awareness of the Constitution, we can't be satisfied until we reach that point. And we've got to do more, all of us, to educate and popularize it. But it's also aspects of the Bill of Rights gives people rights. But those rights are not absolute, most of them. They are balanced against other rights. So my right to express myself might infringe on your right to dignity, and that's a balancing question. I think very often in South Africa, people tend to latch onto a right and not see the responsibilities that come with it, or the need to balance against other people's rights. But I think it's important that to see it as an aspirational document that is implemented by people, and people, unfortunately, can always do better.
Yeah, I mean, aspirational is a big word, and I can actually see that. I'm hoping we can hear you. Let's just quickly say hi to John. I mean, not John. I've been speaking to you all along. Edwin, can you hear us? Good morning. Edwin, are you able to hear us? Good morning. We're not getting your sound. All right, we're going to keep working on it. We will. But John, let's continue this conversation. Aspirational is a big word because, you know, when you talk to an aspirational document, it's something that is, you know, it's looked at and it's glorified, but it's perhaps not achievable. And, you know, that's a little bit of a worry because, you know, this year in particular has been a year where we've been really looking at the Constitution and whether or not, you know, we're seeing that politicians are completely disregarding what our Constitution says. You know, human rights is another issue that has been a really worrisome topic that we've seen, particularly over this pandemic, and how badly South Africans have been affected through the pandemic, and also how their constitutional rights have really been pushed aside. Let's talk to this. I mean, let's start on the political trajectory first. An aspirational document for a politician, surely that is the first port of call. You abide by that Constitution. It's not an aspirational document.
Well, look, when I said aspirational, I would refer to the Bill of Rights, particularly. I mean, obviously, people's rights need to be respected, but there's a question of balancing. So let's take the restrictions imposed by COVID. That limited many people's rights, but that was done in the interests of the broader right and the responsibility of government to the health and safety of the people of South Africa. And I think most people hopefully accept that was necessary. What's happening in South Africa with those limitations and protests from some people is something that's happening across the world. But the reality is that COVID is spread by human contact. And if one wants to reduce the spread of COVID, one has to reduce human contact. That's the issue. As far as, look, the Constitutional Court is the final arbiter of the Constitution. And basically, government respects the judgments of the Constitutional Court and abides by them and implements them. We can have debates, and I mean, any person who commits a crime in South Africa is, in a sense, violating the Constitution or the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. And we have a lot of crime, unfortunately, in South Africa. So that's also why I'm saying it's something we've got to strive towards, not something that we can automatically assume is just going to be there, is going to be achieved. So that's my perspective on the aspirational aspect. Maybe one other point to say is that when the Constitution was drafted, it wasn't seen as this is cast in stone, this is the perfect document for South Africa. Was actually a provision in the Constitution for it to be reviewed annually by a committee of Parliament. And there have been 17 amendments to the Constitution since it came into effect. So there's no perfect document, and it does require, the point I keep making, it does require people to implement it.
Yeah, and that is the reality. I mean, if we look back to 2018, I mean, this was dubbed the year of the Constitution. The government talked about awareness programs and going to the people to heighten awareness. What form did that take, and what programs do you keep citizens informed of the Constitution?
Look, it's not just citizens. Remember, the Constitution applies mostly to all people in South Africa. There's specific rights limited to citizens, the right to vote, for example, but most of the rights are enjoyed by all South Africans, all people in South Africa. We've been running programs of for example, targeting the schools with what we call a slimline constitution, which is the preamble, chapter 1, the founding provisions, which to some extent is the most important section of the Constitution. It requires a 75% majority to amend it. And then the Bill of Rights, and then where you can go to get your rights enforced. There have been many engagements with different communities, particularly focusing on community radio stations and engaging with people like that. Obviously, COVID and the lack of physical interaction makes it more difficult. And then various commemorative events that take place. So it's something that continuously needs to be measured. Let me also just say, in terms of many of the international treaties that South Africa has acceded to, we get measured. We have to give reports on a regular basis, every 4 years, every 5 years, some of them, on the achievement of different rights. Those are not necessarily the rights in the Constitution. Those would be rights in the treaty, the relevant treaty, but those generally do correspond to what's in the Bill of Rights.
All right, let me try my luck again. Edwin, please tell me that you can hear me and we can hear you. Good morning.
Hi, Leanne, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
music to my ears. So good to hear you. I can hear you perfectly now. All right, Edwin. I mean, we've had just a little bit of a conversation. I'm not sure how much you've heard because I'm sure you've been worrying about the technical side for the conversation. But just in terms of where we're at, I mean, we've been talking about this aspirational document that really it's revered the world over. There have been a couple of changes to our constitution. 17 amendments is what we're looking at right now. But in terms of the Constitution, the respect thereof, and how, in general, you view this. Talk to us about the Constitution and your views on it.
Thank you, Leon. First of all, let me say that the Constitution of South Africa is a very well-written document. As you have said, it has been revered the world over. And I think every other country benchmarks on South Africa's Constitution, which is like a milestone since the advent of democracy over 26 years ago. The Constitution talks to the values of human dignity, equality, and freedoms. And when we measure all the rights in the Constitution against anything, there is one particular rendezvous at which all roads ultimately converge, and that's dignity. Human dignity is the cornerstone of the Constitution. Whether you're talking about the right to access to housing, whether you're talking about the right to freedom and security of the person, or the various political and civil rights, as well as socioeconomic rights. However, let me say that even the most despotic governments have constitutions. I've looked at many countries across Africa with very good constitutions in East Africa and West Africa and so forth. And they are not so well known for human rights, respect for human rights, a culture of human rights, to say. I think in South Africa, to a large extent, the Constitution is just that, a piece of paper that is there, but the majority of the marginalized and poor people of South Africa will not even tell you that they have realized any of the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. And that has more to do with the political landscape or politicians or leaders not being able to vindicate those rights that are in the Constitution. We do a lot of litigation as a legal resource center, for example, and that is great. And we applaud ourselves and we applaud the people of South Africa for giving us that opportunity to do that. And the problem that we see is when it comes to the enforcement of the judgments that the courts give, in the sense that they just sometimes become nicely written judgments, and then we don't see those things that we want to be achieved through those judgments. However, we know that no matter what the outcome is, every litigation that we win chips away at any bad doing by the government or any illegitimacy. Yeah. And ultimately we'll get to a point where those rights are realized. I don't know whether it's going to be tomorrow or the day after, but one day it shall be.
Yeah. Edwin, what you're saying is so true. I mean, we heard John a little bit earlier, the Deputy Minister, talking to, the year of COVID, and at the core and the centre of Constitution is exactly what you're saying, human rights, and that everybody treated with dignity. But if there's one thing that we saw being exposed over this last year is the fact that so many South Africans, and this has been for a very long time, have not received the dignity that they so deserve. Whether we talk to pit toilets, whether we talk to schools that are dilapidated, a healthcare system that is failing us, an education system that is failing us. And then we see again what happened during the COVID times and the corruption, where that money was meant to be used to save lives, and yet it just went into the pockets of a few. Now, that is breaking everything that the Constitution stands for. I mean, what does that do to, firstly, the citizens, and secondly, the actual country itself? Edwin, I stay with you. I mean, what is that doing to us?
Every time rights are violated, people lose faith in the system, and that obviously leads to a lot of things. It leads to discontent, and it leads to people sometimes taking the law into their own hands, or people protesting sometimes violently. As we have seen, there's been a lot of service delivery protests around, especially the townships. That has always been the case, since 1994 and even before that, and it is not seeming to change. And I think many people who are now justifiably pessimistic are well within their rights to be in that state of mind, because when we talk about inequality, South Africa is the epitome of inequality, and there's a very high discordance between the haves and the have-nots. And in the process, we have two groups of people who live in the same country but having two totally different experiences. And the Constitution itself, being the written law, is not going to change anything. Laws by themselves do not change anything if there is no political will and if there is no concerted, deliberate effort to make the Constitution a reality. And in the end, we'll be sitting and writing academic articles about this progressive Constitution and the people not having faith in the Constitution and people tending to go to other ways like committing crime, protesting sometimes violently and justifiably so at times. And we, as the civil society organizations, then end up having to come in and protect the rights of the people and protect the Constitution.
Yeah.
In the past, we have seen a lot of violations of the Constitution by the people in the most highest offices. And they have said that the Constitution is not sacrosanct, the Constitution is not supreme. I don't know which Constitution they're reading, because the Constitution itself, as Section 2, says that this Constitution is the supreme law of the country. And the measures to amend that Constitution, if you are not satisfied with it, are contained in Section 74 of that Constitution. So if somebody is not satisfied, they've got to follow the Constitution itself. Yeah. And that to me says whatever context the person would be decrying the Constitution on should be within the confines of the Constitution itself. And it's sacrosanct and it's supreme.
I want to talk a little bit about, forgive me, John, I'm just catching up with Edwin as we very much so, the similar ideals that we spoke about a bit earlier, but obviously getting a different perspective. I want to talk about what is happening now, particularly when it comes to the political sphere here in South Africa. There's been a lot of talk about the Constitution. Our former President, Jacob Zuma, we saw this leaked document speaking to, and many people saying from the ruling party that they were pleading with the president the former president to abide with the Constitution and go and abide with what has been said. I mean, he has stood in front of the nation with his hand on the Constitution and the Bible and swearing to abide by it. And yet we're seeing things in a very different light. I mean, some of the things that have been said by the former president, basically saying that the Constitution subverts the will of the people, going on to say that we're living in what we term a constitutional democracy, but fail to interrogate its real meaning. The painful struggle we fought was for democracy and not the constitutional democracy we have today. This was not negotiated, and I know I was part of it. These are the words uttered by our former president, Jacob Zuma. What do you make of this? I mean, what does this tell us about the constitutional?
It's so unfortunate that somebody holding the highest office in the land would utter those words. You know, if you say you fought for the democracy that we are in now in South Africa, and then at the same time dispute the supremacy of the Constitution, then there's a lot of contradictions in what you say and what you believe in. And I think such people who utter such words, regardless of the office they hold, must be condemned with the ferocity that they deserve. And the fact remains that that does not change, that the Constitution is supreme. And those people who utter such words, at most, they must be held accountable for the words they utter. In more civilized countries or countries that are the first world or developed, when politicians say some things that are distasteful, they are even forced to resign. And I think in the case of the former president, those things have happened many times, and it took quite a while before he actually stepped down. But at the end of the day, I do believe that he looks back and says maybe he could have done things better. Mm. And I hope that those that are in government now are willing to make things better. I mean, I've been in certain forums with the minister, and I know, he's done great in supporting us as the Legal Resources Center as well. And I've seen him in certain forums of the South African Human Rights Commission as well. And, you see that there are some people who are committed to seeing these things realized. But at worst, there are many who also do not want to see these constitutional liberties realized, because they tend to stand in the way of whatever political ambitions they might have, or whatever sinister motives they might have, as we have seen with the Zondo Commission. The things that are being unraveled there actually make us worry a lot about where the country is going. And we might be cautiously optimistic about where we're going to be in the next 5-10 years and more years to come.
All right, I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, if you don't mind, just to stay with us just for a few minutes. We'll wrap up the conversation. I need to get closing remarks from both of you and a couple of reactions as well from you, Deputy Minister. I know that you've heard a lot and I'm sure you'd like to respond, but we need to say goodbye to our SABC 2 viewers at this stage. So at about 8:10, we'll hopefully just give a closing statement to that particular interview. So if you can just sit tight for a bit.
Indeed. Important, interesting conversation. We should ever so often touch base and see where we're at.
Pull in the reins and just relook that constitution. Thank you for watching. Have a fantastic week.